The purpose of Freethought Forum is to be vigilant to the encroachment of religion into government and to educate the general public as to what a freethinker is.
No hunter can trap them, no person can deny.
Welcome to Freethought Forum, the program that encourages the open dialogue, investigation, and consideration of a diverse range of topics dealing with ideologies and philosophies in today's society. My name is Irene Scharf, and as a member of the Bexar County Historical Commission and the Helotes Historical Society, I have been asked to moderate a panel of distinguished guests who will discuss the Freethinkers of Texas. This is the second part of a three-part series. The first part dealt with the historical background and the immigration of European immigrants to Texas. This segment will look at their lives in Texas in a bit more detail. The third program will delve into the Civil War and the impact that it had on the lives and the future of the Freethinker. Our panelists tonight include Catherine Fahringer, who has been the producer of Freethought Forum for over 9 years. She is also a distinguished writer and is also mentioned. In fact, she has a whole chapter devoted to her in this new book called Women Without Superstition. And here she's featured with her animal friends as the Lone Star activist. Also with us this evening is Greg Krauter, who's a noted historian from the Texas Hill Country. He hails from Comfort and is a director of the Comfort Heritage Society and also a member of the Kendall County Historical Society. He's a graduate of the University of Texas and a fifth-generation descendant of the original Ingenhuet store and seventh-generation descendant of some of the early freethinkers who immigrated to Texas. Also with us is Ed Scharf, a retired civil servant and a part-time real estate broker. And for the last several years, he's been researching the German freethinkers in Texas, San Antonio and the Hill Country in particular, in preparation for our historical marker in the Hill Country. He's also active in education and water affairs. So let's begin tonight's discussion with the definition of freethinker. What do we mean by the term freethinker? Catherine.
It's a person that doesn't have a girdle on his mind. Let it stretch. Go out there and investigate everything. Don't just take somebody's word for it. And don't believe someone who says, well, we had a revelation from someone. If you didn't have a revelation, there's no revelation. So I'm with Tom Paine on that. That's a bit, I suppose, frivolous definition, but it pretty well means you can think about anything. It's not verboten. Don't be afraid. You have to be a person of courage, however, because you might not like some of the answers you get when you start looking at religion. And that's why I am not religious anymore. I am a freethinker because I thought freely. So you start thinking and then you become, I guess, because I didn't even know the word when I began to examine religion and find it not my cup of tea.
Catherine, you hear a lot of people, religions mostly, say this great nation was founded on Christianity. Can you name any founders of this country that were Christian, basically, or?
Well, I think maybe Patrick Henry was. He was kind of religious, but the others, Washington, Jefferson,
Madison, Franklin,
name them. They were not Christians.
They called themselves deists often,
well,
which means,
yeah.
Okay, something set this whole thing in motion, and now we're on our own, folks.
Wouldn't you love to question them? They were pre-Darwin, of course. Wouldn't it be fun to talk to them today and see what happens to the deism? Does it fly out the window with all the rest of it, too?
And see what they think of some interpretations of their words.
Oh, yes, especially the part about establishing religion.
I always find the Treaty of Trent that was signed by George Washington as president.
Tripoli. I'm going to correct you on that. It's the Treaty of Tripoli.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Tripoli.
Please. Okay.
Because it was to please the Muslims. I mean, they signed it because they didn't want to scare them, and think that we were, because it had never been founded as a Christian country. Never,
and that's
never,
what they
never.
said in the treaty. And Sam
It
Adams,
says
who was heading
never.
up the Congress, or the Senate, ratified that very treaty too, saying this country was not founded as a Christian nation.
Well, I think that we often forget the true founders were the Native Americans.
Yeah, that's true.
Met the
Good
ship,
point.
shall
Right
we
over
say,
that.
and they all had their own
Yeah.
philosophies, et cetera, also.
That were ignored by the...
So free thinking is sort of a basic tenet of a democratic society, is it not?
Well, it is. It's something you have to be to investigate almost anything. A scientist would be slightly hampered if he had some kind of girdle on his mind that would say, well, oops, if I find that this is not so, then I don't want to go in that direction. Where would we be? And I do notice, I can't help it, it's funny how many religious people immediately, there's some new development, some new technology, they jump right on it. They're just so happy to have it. But then they say you live according to the Bible. I never can quite reconcile all that with that business of dietary things and all that poppycock founded on nothing.
Right. One thing that I think it's important to bring out and emphasize is that education has always been such an important part of the freethinkers and the historically group of freethinkers we're talking about. It was one of their primary considerations with respect to their children and their children's future. When they came to this country, and specifically the Texas Hill Country, they first thing they wanted to found were schools. Not churches, but schools. They wanted to stress education and reasoning. Mm-hmm.
Controlling minds is also sort of part of a political scene of many nations, shall we say, and also during that period from which they came. We're talking mainly about the German freethinkers who immigrated to Texas, mainly between 1845 and 1865. So, as you said, education was really important to those families because they didn't want to be controlled, and a political pawn.
The first freethinkers that came over to Texas, I'd have to say were probably just a handful that came in with Prince Solms and the New Braunfels, and then some went with Baron Moisebach up to Fredericksburg, and later, such as the Luckenbach family, Jacob Luckenbach, who set up Luckenbach, Texas. I'm not sure Willie Nelson and the others are aware of that, but that's an old free-thinking stronghold. But the first organized group of freethinkers that came over were led by Dr. Ferdinand Herff, H-E-R-F-F, at a very young age, 22, a very prominent physician in Germany. He was called by the royal circles to attend to their needs. But he was a very strong freethinker, belonged to this group of what they called the Society of 40 in these three strong university German towns. There were 33 of that group that left a year before the 1848 revolution broke out. Now, they were the smart ones, I guess. But they came over here and settled set up a little town called Bettina, which was just 2 miles east of Castell. On the map, Greg, you could probably point to...
Right up here, north of Fredericksburg.
Oh.
Yes,
In the Llano Mason area.
Yeah.
Right.
I like that name.
It is.
Well, the Bettina name was based on a famous journalist, was it? Or Arnhem Bettina in Germany? Perhaps you know.
Bettina von Arnhem. Mm-hmm.
Bettina von Arnhem. Was that a writer?
Poet
Okay.
and
One that a person they knew and admired very much, so they named the town after them. Now, some historians claim they were a communistic group.
That's what I have heard,
But now that's interesting. First of all, you talk about education, Greg. So many people think godless communists. If you're communist, you're immediately godless. Well, first of all, communism is an economic form, like capitalism, like socialism. All of them are godless, to start with.
It's based on the concept of communal living.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's all
And
for
what did we
survival
have?
purposes, which the early Christians practiced,
Right.
and which the early pilgrims to this country
And
practiced.
the flower
to stay.
children, the hippies, they
look
all
at
had communes.
Look at mutual
What is
funds.
those?
Isn't that a communal
Sure it is.
Well, that's a
venture?
good point.
I mean, you know, there are a lot of things in our society that are communal.
And we speak about community all the time. We're supposed to want to be a part of this community and contribute to it. So I really don't see how everybody gets so scared of, oh, they're communists. They live in a commune. Wow, bad. Yeah.
And immediately they're godless too.
Oh, of course.
Now these people,
Which is a good idea, but
as educated as we were, I dare say most of them were a lot more familiar with the Bible than any of the 30,000 peasant farmers that came into
Very
New
much
Braunfels.
so.
And that was the reason they were freethinkers. You know, they had read, you know, what was in the Holy Scriptures and said, we're going to become freethinkers,
Yeah,
basically.
many of them had good educations, and a good education in that day and time consisted of a liberal education, including studying the religions.
Yes, it is.
And there was a revolution about 1848, was there not, in
Correct.
Germany? An uprising of students and educated persons
And that
against some of the...
really brought many of them to this country as a result of that.
Now, interestingly enough, the Prussian king and several of the others agreed when the revolution started to go ahead and set up a Congress that would consider establishing a constitution. Constitutional monarchy is what they called it, like England has today. But as soon as the leaders saw they were winning the revolution, they immediately threw most of them in jail and said back to the old ways. And that caused a large exodus of freethinkers to say, all is lost here. We're heading for the hills, the Texas hills.
There was another early settlement that large part of it later went on to found the city of Burney. When it failed, it was called Tuscaloosa. And they chose that name. That was the name of Cicero's summer home. And so getting to why they called these various settlements the Latin colonies. People could speak fluent Latin, and many of them Greek.
And what happened to these Latin communities?
Well, the only one that really enjoyed any longer-term degree of success was Sisterdale. Most of the others, for various reasons, failed. Castell, I think, the first winter's famine pretty much took care of it.
Supplies were hard to bring in, too. Provisions hard to
And
let
they had received some help from the Native Americans in that area, but even with that, they weren't able to make it throughout the first year.
Why did Sisterdale survive? I know in September they celebrated their 150th anniversary. Why were they successful and some of the other Latin communities
I suspect
not?
it was a number of reasons. For one thing, they had a pretty large collection of notable families that settled there, people that also had ties to many people in the old country. But location probably had a lot to do with it too. It was on a road that was well traveled between Austin and San Antonio, Fredericksburg and San Antonio.
And of course it was located on two creeks, the sister creeks,
where it derived
which
its
fed
name.
into the Guadalupe. And Catherine, you were saying earlier about this hostile environment, so water was really
of course,
critical
is important, yeah.
to the
All
settlement.
those scrubby.
Well, one of those early settlers in Sisterdale was one of your ancestors, I believe.
Yes,
and, he even
Professor-
developed a water cure.
Yeah, Professor
Oh,
Kopp
yeah, I'd
was a
forgotten
great,
about
great,
that.
great granddad of mine. Let me pull this up now
About
and
that,
show
yeah,
it, hold it up.
a picture of him?
Yeah, he came up with a hydrostatic water cure facility, and this is a copy of a lithograph that was done as a placemat advertisement at that time, way back then. But,
What year are we talking about?
we're talking about in the around 1850 to 52 was
So-
when he established this facility, and it became well known. It was visited by a number of prominent royalty and various people.
Oh, that light is
What's
reflecting,
depicted
so-
on here? This is, I believe, the Kopp home, is it not?
Yeah, in the middle is the cabin, and it shows a tilled field. Above it's the actual water cure facility, and then they have around it they have examples of some of the cures that Now, many of these were brought, they weren't developed in Sisterdale. They were part of the German culture and brought over from the old country. And some of them, to this day and time, are still used. I know, especially in my family, versions of some of these have been passed down. And
This place became almost world famous at the time. Paul Olmsted, is that the famous U.S. architect and who laid out the Central Park in New York?
Frederick Law Olmsted.
Frederick Law Olmsted, thank you. He spent several weeks there with a very ill brother who received treatment there and had mentioned that in his writings. We had Duke Paul, brother of the King of Württemberg, come through and was just amazed. He said, here I'm coming to the wilderness and look at these libraries, look at the silver. He said, I could imagine I'm in any the finest castles in Europe when I'm here in the woods. They had trouble getting rid of him, incidentally. He liked it so much. But that place was basically world famous, and there were some great minds there, notables, as you pointed out, because it was in 1853, I think, where they petitioned the state to set up the first public university in Texas. Up to that time, we had 6 or 7 universities in Texas, but they were all religious. And I don't know whatever happened to that, their request. But then they also were kind of a rabble-rousing group, too. You know, they were very anti-slavery. They were very pro-democracy, pro-liberty.
very vocal about it. And very vocal about it.
Well, how about that 1854 convention in San Antonio, the Sungerfest?
Yeah.
You want to talk on that?
Well, that set the stage for many things that came later, leading up and into the war between the states. This group that was part of an organization called the Free Society actually laid out a number of platforms, things that included such notions as dividing Texas up and having a free West Texas, abolishment of slavery in certain portions of the state. These people were a very idealistic group, and they weren't afraid to speak their mind. They had not been, in the old country, and they brought that idealism with them over here.
And I believe one of them, was it August Simmering, who was the editor of one of the papers, actually published that and got run out of the state?
Oh, he had his
because of
his
his
facility
free-thinking.
burned. lost his entire facility.
For
Free
such
press.
revolutionary ideas as let's don't have slavery.
Well, we also had the first person that set up the San Antonio Express newspaper. What was his name?
Dewey?
That was Dowie?
Yeah.
That started the Express newspaper.
Well, look what it's come to. Excuse
I know,
me.
but he's not alive anymore. It used to be a good paper.
It's not.
Excellent paper.
It's not very free-thoughty anymore.
But they were all very adamant about, no slavery. They thought everybody should be free. I mean, that was a pretty tough stand to take back
well, in this
in
nest
those days.
of Confederacy or
Well, and another stand,
sympathizers
separation
or-
of church and state, is the stand they took. They
That's
said
correct.
no
Yeah.
preacher should be allowed to be teaching in any of the public schools, which was
Great.
happening.
Well,
a
that
lot.
was a founding principle, I know, of the German English school in San Antonio, wasn't it?
Right.
Yes, it
Which was
was.
founded by Freethinkers.
And can you believe, the old Sunday Blue laws? They said, why should, that doesn't make any sense,
doesn't.
setting aside a special day for observant, of the Sabbath or prayer. Why, basically. Even today, the blue laws still exist in our, you
Well,
can't
you
buy
can't
liquor
buy
today.
booze before noon on Sunday. I don't know what's the
That's a
difference.
carryover.
Is that so you'll
Yeah.
be sure and go to church? I don't go to church anyway, so why can't I buy it till 11 o'clock? Why do I?
I don't want you drunk before noon, I guess.
Oh, I have so many crazy little things.
It almost got a lot of them killed back then. I mean, it turned
Well, I can
rather
see why.
nasty.
Oh, yeah. Well, it could get pretty nasty now if you suggested a few things that
Yeah, that's true. Now, in 1854, something interesting happened, to all these little communities. A fellow named Altgeld came in and started setting up the town of Comfort.
Yeah, that's the year Comfort was founded, and Comfort was influenced largely, or to a great extent, by the neighboring community of Sisterdale. For instance, gentleman that had originally been part of the Tuscaloosa settlement, Christoph Flock. He was one of the men on the surveying crew that Ernst Altgeld brought to Comfort, and he also ended up marrying Professor Kopp's oldest daughter. And so you have all these ties between the various communities. But it was founded in 1854, and it became a magnet for many of the area freethinkers and free-thinking families. I think within a little over a year, there were at least 30 families living right in the immediate Comfort area that were definitely freethinkers, and quite a few more in the vicinity, yes. Comfort enjoyed a unique history at that time, and it continued for many years. They even had a free-thinking publisher of the local newspaper up till 1904, openly professed to be a freethinker.
I almost made it if I'd been warned.
Right.
Now, your friend and fellow historian Esther Wiedenfeld had an interesting comment that she attributed to a friend of ours who said her mother said that if you wanted to pursue religion, you go to Fredericksburg. If you want to give up, all that foolishness, or I forget the exact words, or if you want to be free from all the religion, you move to Comfort.
Yeah.
I love that name.
Yeah,
Comfort, so perfect.
It's got an inviting name to it. Yeah.
It really is. Beautiful town.
How did it get named, do you know?
Well, they originally called the survey camp Camp Comfort, and it was because of the plentiful game, and it's nestled in a valley surrounded by protective hills, plenty of fresh water. Just a comfortable place.
Oh, pity.
And they chose the English word over the German.
Yeah, they had a couple of other alternatives in German, but I think they decided they'd be too cumbersome for future generations. Yeah.
I was talking to some of the Altgeld family the other day, the founder of Comfort. There's a bronze bust of Altgeld in the park, and one or two of them I asked, you know where your great-great-great is buried? They had no idea.
Oh, really?
Which happens to be up on the Burney Stage Road, just about a mile and a half north of where the intersection is of Scenic Loop and Burney Stage, not too far from actually where we live.
His wife was an interesting study, too. She was somewhat younger than him, but she was truly a free spirit and a free thinker, well educated.
Is she the one who did her memoirs?
Yes. Wrote extensively, taught school for a short time in early day Comfort.
What was the position of women in the free-thinking society early in Texas? Do you know?
Well, generally speaking, they were given the chance to receive as good of education as the males. I think they were at that day and time they were expected to be supportive of the family in other ways, which included some menial tasks too. But
because where they came from, it was Kinderküche, Kirche.
Yeah.
Church, kitchen, and
right.
children.
But compared to other ethnic cultures, I think they were probably much better educated. At least in the Kopp family, almost all the daughters went on to college. The next generation, almost all the children of Wolfgang Kopp, who was the youngest son of Professor Kopp, they ended up going back to Germany after the Civil War, at the beginning of the Civil War, but I think almost all of his girls ended up becoming medical doctors, which in that day of time, even in Germany, was quite unusual. Yeah.
Well, Altgeld, you mentioned his wife. I forget her first name, but
Emma.
Yes, Altgeld. Emma Merck Altgeld. I read a statement the other day to the effect that said she was telling a friend of hers she'd never marry Altgeld unless he was a very liberal, free-thinking type of person. I mean, she was evidently quite liberal and open-minded herself, but she wasn't going to have one of these old-fashioned KKK people.
She's very idealistic. This whole group of people were extremely idealistic people. They,
How about Broadbeck? I'd heard he was a free thinker with his airplane invention 50 years before the Wright brothers.
That's an
up
interesting
around
story.
Luckenbach. He was funded for the most part by Dr. Herf, who was a good friend of his. And from what I heard, he was quite a free thinker. And he had an airplane invention 50 years, what, in 1853 or 54?
Before the Civil War.
Before the Civil War. It worked on the principle of springs, but it had some of the first wing, tail, and rudder designs, you know, ever shown.
Did it get off the ground?
He did, but he came down too hard on the run. Without getting hurt, he survived the crash.
Oh,
Where
wow.
was it, in the hill country, or where did
Yeah, up
Near
around
Luckenbach.
Oh, near
north of-
Luckenbach.
Yeah, around
never-
Luckenbach.
Do we
And
have the plans of his early?
That
I
would
think
be
there's some
interesting.
crude plans that
There's a book
survived, but yeah, a book about it too. But I think the Civil War came along and pretty much disrupted his momentum.
Very
I think
much
there was
so.
a bust of him in the San Pedro Park. That was supposedly the site of one of his early trials also.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh,
I
in
didn't
San Antonio.
remember that.
Now, there
It
was
was
a
an
Baron
in-
von Westphal, too, that was quite interesting.
Mhm.
Remember him?
Now you're talking about Karl Marx's
Brother-in-law.
brother-in-law.
He came over with Dr. Herf, the group of 33 at the time.
Yeah, in fact, there at one point in time, supposedly several people were trying to seriously talk Karl Marx into coming to migrating to Texas and settling in Sisterdale. And but that would have changed world history.
I was going to say, now there's a name that will give Freethought a real...
Right. Of course, he probably would have if it had not been for his poor health. And I think that's one reason his wife's younger brother came over instead, was to give him a picture of Texas.
Was this in his later years, after his writing, the
Actually,
Capital?
after his initial writing, but actually it was during his middle age. He was middle-aged at the time.
And what do we know of Baron von Westphal's
Not a whole
journey
lot.
or stay here in Texas?
Not a whole lot. I think he was here about 2 years, I believe.
And then went back.
I know he went back prior to the Civil War breaking out, but he wrote back home about wanting, having aspirations to become a cowboy or whatever it was called at that time on the Texas frontier. And his name appears in some of the early documents of that time.
You know, one of the most amazing things that happened is with Dr. Herf and his surgery, on the ground cataract surgery.
What? Wow.
On an Indian. Successful cataract surgery, I think is what it was. You know, he was going blind or getting a cloud like many of us. I've had double cataract surgery already, but performed that on the ground.
Pretty amazing.
Without anesthesia?
Without anesthesia, without anything. I mean, open air, no
Brave Indian.
germ-free environment, but everything turned out nicely, and the Indian rewarded him later with a squaw, I think.
What a nice present, I'm sure.
I don't think his wife
would be very happy.
It was intended to be a squaw. He, of course, I think they went ahead and adopted the young Indian lady and probably sent her to college, too.
I think the Indians as a whole in this area of the hill country were more fascinated by the Freethinkers and those Germans than threatened by them. There's an interesting note in one diary that pictures a number of Comanche huddled outside of a cabin in Sisterdale listening to one of the weekly group discussions in in Greek and Latin going on inside the cabin.
I know several of them had quite extensive libraries. Do we know what happened to any of those materials?
Well, some were taken or sent back to the old country. Some still remain in descendants' families to this day and time. Professor Kopp had a number of years' worth of writings that he shipped to the Northeast to have printed, and he never knew what happened to those that were lost.
What a shame.
So a number of things happened especially when the war came along.
Well, that concludes the second part of our three-part series on the German Freethinkers in Texas. Thanks to our panel, and we hope you'll join us for the third part, which will delve into the Civil War.
I think as I please, and this gives me pleasure.
My conscience decrees, this right I must treasure.
My thoughts will not cater
To